From the world's sweatshop to Aimless AI, the great dragon at a crossroads. As of early 2026, the Chinese dragon stands at the most complex intersection in its modern history. Its journey from an agrarian society to the world's second-largest economic superpower was no accident, but the result of a meticulously laid strategy. Today, however, those once solid foundations are being rocked by internal tremors, a distorted demographic structure, and a crisis of confidence in the social contract that once bound the state and its people together. From the world's factory to a global resource engine. For over 2 decades since joining the WTO in 2001, China has operated like a gargantuan, sleepless machine. It has evolved far beyond a mere low-cost assembly hub into a total global resource extraction engine. Beyond accounting for 30% of global manufacturing, China has moved decisively from the end of the chain, assembly, to the middle and beginning, processing and raw materials. Today, China produces 60% of the world's steel, 50% of its cement, and most crucially, controls 70% of rare earth processing. In 2001, China's value-added export ratio was a mere 25%. Today, it has soared to 45% across many sectors. This indicates that China doesn't just produce more, it has integrated the world's raw materials, energy, and logistics into its own internal system. This is why the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, is not merely a political project, but the great artery designed to feed the world's resources into China's industrial giant. Real estate beyond a bubble, a shadow social security, and the state's economic lifeblood. While the industrial sector forged ahead, the Chinese government propelled real estate into a cornerstone that carries nearly 30% of the nation's GDP. However, this is no ordinary business sector. It functions as a shadow social security system that anchors the structures of both state and society across multiple dimensions simultaneously. For the citizenry, real estate is the paramount savings vehicle, accounting for a staggering 70% of total household wealth. On the fiscal front, China's local governments have assumed the role of the master landlord, sustaining their budgets by acquiring cheap rural land, developing infrastructure, and then selling lease rights to developers at premium prices. This revenue constitutes a massive 30 to 40% of local government budgets, the primary reservoir of funds used for everything from paying civil servant salaries to constructing high-speed rail networks. When this mechanism falters, the crisis ripples out like a row of falling dominoes. Not only does household wealth evaporate, but the wallets of local governments also run dry, leading to a state of fiscal paralysis that severely destabilizes local administrations. Furthermore, real estate serves as a strategic policy tool used to manage migration through the hukou, household registration, system, and acts as a massive sponge to absorb surplus labor from rural areas. This is precisely why the Chinese government cannot allow the real estate sector to simply burst like a typical bubble. The fallout would be catastrophic: the collapse of household finances, a disruption of employment, and a fundamental shaking of the state's legitimacy. The haunting image of over 20 million vacant units across the country is not merely a tangible economic loss. It is a colossal political burden that the government must grimly carry to prevent the entire system from imploding. When Meituan and unemployment collide, the rise of Tangping and the checked-out generation. Amidst mounting economic pressure, Chinese society has birthed a term that encapsulates the pain of the modern era: Meituan. Involution on a Jan. It is a state where everyone is forced to run on a treadmill that accelerates ever faster, merely to maintain their current position. This is a journey to nowhere, an exhaustive, hyper-competitive cycle where employees endure the 996 grind, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, not for career advancement, but out of a visceral fear of being purged from the system. Similarly, parents drive their children into a frantic academic arms race from as early as kindergarten, desperate for a competitive edge in a labor market that is rapidly suffocating. This agony is exacerbated by a brutal reality: youth unemployment, ages 16 to 24, has breached record highs of over 20%, with even more alarming figures if those who have completely abandoned the job search are included. When a high-level education no longer guarantees a livelihood and hard work fails to secure a home in a market priced beyond reach, the youth have retaliated with the philosophy of tangping, lying flat, tangping, a total checking out of societal expectations. This checking out is not an act of laziness. It is a deliberate severance from an exploitative cycle in an economic game they can no longer win. By reducing their life's desires to the absolute minimum, choosing not to buy houses, not to marry, and refusing to serve as human fuel for a GDP growth they never share, they reclaim power over their own lives. When hard work yields no progress and a degree becomes a mere scrap of paper in a jobless landscape, lying flat becomes the final weapon to reject a social contract the state can no longer fulfill. 996 and the fading social contract. The glory built on 996 culture, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, has become an invisible cage. The old promise was, endure today for a better tomorrow. But today's reality tells a different story. Real wages in major cities are stagnant compared to housing costs, which are 30 to 40 times the average annual income, while youth unemployment has previously breached 20%. When the youth stop believing that perseverance leads to success, society enters a state of stillness. This loss of motivation is more dangerous than a financial crisis because it erodes the very engine of China's power. BRI from a trillion-dollar megaproject to exporting crises and the haunting specter of debt. The Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, is China's modern-day Silk Road strategy designed to interlink infrastructure across more than 150 countries via land-based belts and maritime roads. The colossal funding driving this initiative does not stem from a charitable budget. Rather, it is fueled by China's massive foreign exchange reserves and mobilized through state policy banks such as the China Development Bank and the Exim Bank of China, alongside specialized vehicles like the Silk Road Fund. This capital is deployed in the form of low-interest loans to developing nations, with the caveat that these funds must be used to hire Chinese contractors and purchase Chinese raw materials to construct ports, railways, and highways. However, as domestic demand reached a saturation point and the real estate sector crumbled, the BRI was elevated into a primary vent for discharging excess capacity into the global market. China has injected and loaned over $1 trillion to sustain the lifeblood of domestic steel and cement factories. Yet this gamble is now facing costs far higher than anticipated. As gargantuan projects in numerous nations fail to achieve economic viability, they have triggered a macro-level bad debt crisis. Today, over 60% of BRI debtor nations are in financial distress and at high risk of default. This has forced Chinese state banks to pivot from development lenders to crisis managers, perpetually rolling over debt, issuing new loans simply to service old ones. This desperate cycle is maintained solely to prevent the surge of non-performing loans from breaching the surface and destabilizing China's own internal financial system. The BRI has thus evolved from a machine of geopolitical influence into a staggering financial burden from which China cannot retreat. To halt the BRI would be to silence the machines of tens of thousands of domestic factories that would instantly lose their orders. Persisting with these projects amidst a mounting pile of bad debt is a painful survival strategy, a move to sustain domestic industrial stability and prevent a total bankruptcy of the dream of global hegemony. The geopolitics of consumption, hunting for demand in emerging markets. Behind the facade of infrastructure, China is searching for new consumers to replace its shrinking, checked-out domestic middle class. Africa, South Asia, and the Middle East are not just resource pools. They are home to billions who still have the dream of progress. While Chinese citizens are choosing to live less, these emerging markets are being positioned to absorb China's surplus supply. China is exporting a budget lifestyle model, offering a good enough life at an affordable price via cheap EVs, smartphones, and low-cost smart cities. China is betting that if it can control the infrastructure and finance of the developing world, it can dictate the consumption of the global majority. The long-term superpower race may not just be about high-tech, but about who sells the dream to the world's masses. Aging society plus AI. A risky escape. China is facing a demographic time bomb. Installing over 50% of the world's industrial robots is the final attempt to sustain production. However, AI and robots have a fatal flaw. They can replace labor, but they do not consume. AI does not buy houses, eat meals, or pay for tuition. As humans are replaced, income concentrates within tech firms or the state, slowing the circulation of money and deepening the divide between elite cities and dying towns. The true crisis: a lack of demand absorption. In simple terms, China's problem today is the world's most modern factory with no one to buy the goods. This isn't due to poverty, but a total lack of confidence. When people fear for their jobs and their future, they save, stay still, and stop spending. In their parents' generation, hard work meant a better life. Today, it means a mortgage that never ends. China is becoming a nation that is high in efficiency, but small in dreams. This is the ultimate danger. When people no longer believe tomorrow will be better, no amount of economic stimulus can revive the demand that has died in the hearts of those who have already checked out. The dragon today is not weak in state power, but it is buckling under the weight of its past successes. The transition from sweat to silicon, from a youthful population to an aging one, and from a collective dream to individual survival, is a painful metamorphosis. In the short term, the state remains strong. But in the long term, a haunting question remains. If the people no longer wish for a better life, for whom is the state developing? This is not a collapse, but a transformation. The face of Made in China is entering an era where machines flourish while the hearts of the people grow cold.